I'm going over the best and the worst legends in Apex Season 16. The legends that I'll list in the lower tiers are still good legends, so if I put your main there, don't trip out. It's just that I think these legends will wind up being some of the more lower picked ones in this season. Now obviously at the end of the day, a great player can make any legend look S tier, so let's get into it. Starting off in D tier is Revenant. Now Revenant saw no changes in this season besides the reworked class perk system, and to be honest, he needs some big changes. His ultimate is extremely lackluster in today's meta, and the best parts about his kit are his passive and his tactical. But even with his tactical, it can cause quite a bit of audio and visual clutter that sometimes it may wind up screwing you or your teammates over with it. There's been some rumors about this legend getting a rework in the near future, so I guess we'll just have to wait and stay tuned to see what Respawn is cooking up for Revenant. Moving on to C tier. Now I know a lot of people love this legend because let's face it, he can be a fun pick. But yes, it's Octane. Zooming around with his stim and flying through the air on his jump pad is a great time. And I will say, Octane can certainly be higher up on a tier list if the player is a movement god, by utilizing things like tap strafing on his jump pad or learning new mechanics while using his stim. However, for the average Octane player, I just don't think he's that good of a legend for the team. In terms of mobility abilities, well, other legends certainly outclass him when it comes to making macro or even micro rotations. The jump pad is loud and it's generally not too hard to beam an opponent who's padding through the air. It can be oppressive, however, when a full team pads on you, but by no means is this the norm. The days in which Octane was meta seem to be something of the past. Second in C tier is going to be Gibraltar. Now despite the buffs to shotguns, I don't think we will see a Gibby meta return in most elos. It's still early on, so I could be proved wrong, but regardless, he's definitely not going to be a super popular pick in pubs or lower level ranked. That I'm confident in. His ultimate, while strong, has a very long cooldown on it, and using the larger legends in Apex often makes players feel like they're moving slower and are just more clunky. There's no doubt Gibby is strong with his gun shield and his bubble, but for a support legend, I think there are going to be better options this season. Next in C tier is going to be Lifeline. Now Lifeline received two small buffs this season, one being her care package now drops extremely fast from when she calls it in. It now only takes 8 seconds for it to arrive, and while her care package can come in handy throughout a match for some loot, it's not typically game changing. Her passive revive also received a small buff where the slow penalty of reviving an ally is reduced. This should make it so that Lifeline can draw her weapon out faster, and while yes, this change is good, it's not enough to move the mark in my eyes. It pushes her in the right direction, but the reality is Newcastle basically has a better revive animation, and the fact that he uses a shield when reviving makes me think we won't ever see a Lifeline revive shield return to the game. For this reason, Lifeline's always going to be in the lower tiers when she's compared to someone like, say, Newcastle. Now, I know some of these picks you guys will disagree with, and the last one here is no exception. Rampart. I'm putting Rampart in C tier mostly because her abilities haven't really fit into the meta, and this season doesn't seem to be any different for her. Now, yes, it's nice that she's a part of the controller legend class and can scan beacons now, but I just always feel like Rampart needs to have very specific kinds of fights for her to be effective. I guess this could be argued for all legends, right? Well, it's just that for her, if you don't have walls up already, or you can't get them going during a fight because they keep getting shot out, that could get you killed or just render Rampart useless. And with Sheila, her ultimate, it is insanely overpowered and really fun to use. It's just not always going to be able to win if an enemy gets the draw on you. And most good players know not to challenge while the turret is already ripping. Rampart is definitely strong in niche moments, so I could see her in B tier, but this season I'm gonna start her off in C tier. Alright, moving on to B tier. First up is Vantage. The more this legend has been around, the more I think she's underestimated. There's no doubt she's one of the more frustrating legends to go up against, and that's mostly because of her insanely strong sniper, but also because she can escape fights with her mobility. With Vantage being in the recon class, it previously made sense for people to play some of the other recon legends who give direct scans instantaneously to their teammates. But now that the scan legends are not as good as they previously were, that inadvertently makes Vantage a better pick this season. Now, I don't think anyone wants a lobby filled with every team having a Vantage on it, but I think that also makes her more valuable in Season 16. The less Vantages there are, the less players can actually combat her sniper. If anyone is thinking this legend is trash, trust me, you're gonna want to give her another try. Next in B tier is Fuse.
Oh, you got bloody smashed, mate.
Now, I actually really like Fuse. He's really good at causing chaos, denying area, and finding ways to be a pest with all of his abilities. The addition of the extra ammo and smart loot from the assault bins are a great little change for this class. And for Fuse, with his passive, it can make it so he has maximum efficiency with inventory management. This is a small thing, but can make a really big difference over the long haul. Fuse is considered an assault legend, as I said, but if you view him as more of a supportive assault legend, you can see how his kit can be complemented with good gun skill and a solid understanding of angles. Rarely will his abilities be the sole reason you kill a squad, but when coupled with those two other things I just mentioned, well, you basically have cracked the code for one of the strongest ways to use this legend. This is especially true with his ultimate. While on its own is incredibly inconsistent, it can be very good when coupled with gunfire, grenades, or even other damage dealing abilities. Players will often have little outplay to avoid this fiery mess. Next in B tier is Ashe. Now, the biggest downside to Ashe is how sensitive her portal placement can be. Sometimes you may only have a second and you're trying to place it somewhere further back, only for it to read somewhere closer, and this could totally screw up your play entirely. However, she's still a good legend, and maybe even A tier in the right hands, but she's meant to be played aggressively, either aggressively getting into a fight and using her portal to get out if it gets too hectic, or aggressively using her portal to take high ground or just close the gap to an enemy team. Her passive can also be extremely helpful for finding out information about where players just died, and often you can use this to gather significant info around what your team's next decisions will be. Now, surprisingly this season, Mirage is finally higher up on the tier list. He did receive a couple small buffs, but I think this will increase his pick rate for the season, and he will continue to find small ways to help his team out. So they buffed Mirage's revive passive, which now allows the teammate he's reviving to go invisible shortly after Mirage completes the revive. It'll last for 3 seconds, but if the teammate or Mirage pull their weapon out, the invisibility wears off. His decoys also receive some much needed upgrades, because if an enemy shoots his decoy now, they will get alerted that they have been bamboozled, and Mirage's icon marker now tracks that bamboozled player's movement for 3.5 seconds. This is up from 2.5 seconds. They also said that decoys are only triggered by bullet fire and melee now, but I haven't fully tested this out to see if it's 100% accurate. In the past, Mirage has had some bugs around his decoys where if you sent them out on awkward geometry, it would just instantly eliminate the decoy. Mirage is a fun legend, and he has a really short cooldown on all of his abilities. So he's no longer bottom tier, but he's definitely still a long way from being top tier this season. Next up is Catalyst. Now, besides a couple bug fixes and the update to her now being in the controller class, Catalyst didn't receive any significant changes. However, I think she's definitely like 25% better from when she was released. She had a good amount of bugs upon release, and now it seems like she's in a much better spot. Catalyst is also one of the legends that should look for specific spaces to fight in, and can be really strong in those areas. Personally, I enjoy the flexibility of her passive and tactical being good for indoor fights, but her ultimate can be strong outdoors and in the open. The one bad thing about her is all of the visual clutter that comes from her kit. Sometimes her tactical just gets in the way of where you're aiming at targets, and also sometimes with her ultimate, it can easily backfire if you or your teammates don't have a clear plan on why it's being used in that moment. Just as much as it's a wall for you, it can easily serve as a wall for your enemies too. Alright, next in B tier is Crypto. Now with Crypto, obviously he's a part of the recon class, and he's able to scan beacons to get a brief UAV of the map. Well, I think he has an extra advantage here, because with this, he can hit the beacon with his drone. Now, recon legends are only allowed to scan each beacon one time. This prevents teams from camping on it and continuously scanning it, and it forces them to push out from it. However, in competitive environments, I think Crypto will have a huge edge here. By being able to use his drone to figure out this knowledge, well, you don't have to always risk your positioning for it. This is a good buff for him, and it makes sense for his kit. Now, I'm not sure if you'll see his pick rate skyrocket or anything, but you should see more of him in higher level ranked or even competitive Apex this season. Last in B tier is Mad Maggie. Now you might be wondering, why isn't Mad Maggie in A tier? You might have seen a lot of streamers playing her, especially with all of the new shotgun changes that have happened. Well, for me, her Wrecking Ball is way too inconsistent still for me to put her in A tier. At times, this can be an extremely underwhelming ability, but more particularly with its effectiveness. I believe this ability should not deal damage and slow Maggie herself. It makes no sense that you can throw this ball in a way where it shouldn't come back and hit you or even your teammates, and yet it does. And it can easily cost you the fight, or it can harm your teammates if it winds up slowing or stunning one of you during an engagement. Even if they made that change and it came at the expense of a longer cooldown for this ability, I really wouldn't mind. Now, with all of that said, her passive and tactical are my favorite part about her kit. I just wish they would put a little bit more time into fixing this Wrecking Ball, because I think she has some serious potential to be a top tier legend. Alright, moving on to some of the best legends this season, A tier. First up is Wattson. Now Wattson's really good at controlling area and giving a safety net within that area to her and her teammates. Her gen is really helpful for passive shield healing and stopping all incoming ordinances, and her fences are much more reliable these days. Not to mention, if an enemy walks through them, you can beam them while they're stunned and gain a huge edge over them. Now with the fact that Wattson is part of the controller class who can get the next ring knowledge, this buffs her a good bit and makes her an even more viable pick in ranked and competitive Apex. It used to just be like Wattson was played in competitive Apex because of her gen, but now you're going to see much more of her running around in Season 16. But I think there's one other controller legend who might edge her out, and that's Caustic. I'd have to say Caustic is probably the best pick out of them all, because with Caustic being able to scan consoles too to get the ring knowledge, well, Caustic is really the ultimate offensive and defensive legend that is of this class. His gas can be used to post up and hold an area, or it can be used just as effectively taking that area away from an enemy team. When used correctly, his ultimate can be a huge game changer for the entire fight. Now, I know he's a big legend, so it's not as fun to play as some of the others, but you will for sure see more Caustics running around in ranked this season. Personally, I like Caustic more than Wattson, but ultimately it's going to come down to your guys' playstyle and who you value more in different areas. Third in A tier is Bloodhound. Now, Bloodhound saw a ton of changes this update, and a lot of people initially thought they weren't going to be good anymore. But I gotta say, that just isn't true. The power has just shifted. Bloodhound is way more of a tracker now than opposed to just a scan bot. They still have scans, and yes, they're powerful, but it's not the only thing to do anymore. When you use your ult, or after you scan, you will see a white raven, and by interacting with that raven, it will fly in the direction of the nearest team. If a team isn't really close to you, it will still fly in that general direction, and it's up to you to put the pieces together to find where they are. You will have to do more reconnaissance, in other words. And Bloodhound is still going to be played a ton in ranked, pubs, and probably even competitive. There are always going to be players who are taking advantage of recon legends. Not to mention the change to the beacon scans, well, this helps players immensely when they're on the prowl and trying to find more fights. I know there's some bugs, or it appears like there's a few bugs with how the White Raven works. Sometimes it's flying into buildings or through buildings, and it's kind of wonky at times. I'm sure this will get ironed out as Apex looks into it or figures out what's causing it. But overall, Bloodhound is not bottom tier or anything like that. They are still a very strong legend in Season 16. Next up, Newcastle. As far as the support legend class goes, Newcastle is definitely one of the better options to use this season. Now, I know he's a bigger legend, but man, his kit is actually really good. His revive passive alone is enough to run him now that Seer won't be as popular. Knock on wood. Not to mention, he can use his ultimate to have some mobility, like getting up to high ground, or when he's caught out on low ground, attaching to his teammate to help them out. His tactical can be used for an aggressive push or a solid backup plan if he's got to avoid some damage or any ongoing Bangalore ults. I always say that Newcastle is a top tier legend, but that he's slept on, or people just don't think he's fun, or I don't know why. Whatever it is, I can just say this legend is not weak, and if you want to support your teammates, try out Newcastle in Season 16. Next up in A tier is Horizon. Now, Horizon finally received a long overdue nerf to her gravity lift, but I don't think it's by any means a killer to her kit. Look, abusing the lift for trying to one-mag someone with an R301 as you flew through the air was quite a ridiculous concept. So now there's just some more balance to it and some more risk and reward. You won't get 100% accuracy while in the lift, which is similar to all the other movement mechanics like zip lines or jump pads. However, when you go up the lift, it's now going to be 10% faster. This doesn't sound like a lot on the surface, but it certainly makes a difference. On top of all that, her ultimate is still really strong when paired with grenades or any other damage dealing abilities. I've seen this ultimate single-handedly shift fights in the favor of the Horizon team so much in ranked that it's hard to say, okay, yeah, Horizon is just useless now. Like, I'm not gonna buy it. She's still a really strong legend. And this often happens when a legend's really OP and then gets tuned down a little bit. People are like, oh, they're useless now. And it's like, no, they're still really strong. We were just used to a really, really strong version of them. Okay, last up in A tier, Valkyrie. Despite the rumors that Valk was gonna get nerfed and have her scanning HUD passive removed, it appears that's not happening. Valk can't scan beacons now as she's a part of the Skirmisher class, which does affect how she may be played, but she still gets knowledge on the incoming care packages throughout the map. Now look, Valk is still a top tier pick in Season 16. Between her jetpack passive, the missile swarm, and her skyward dive, there's really no reason why she'd be fully removed from the meta. And I'm sure some of you would even put her in S tier. I wouldn't necessarily argue with you either. If Valk is your main or you really like playing her, you can still enjoy her to her full potential in Season 16. Okay, moving on to the best of the best S tier. First up, Wraith. The buffs to Wraith were huge, not in the sense that it drastically changed how she works, but just a nice addition to her underwhelming portal. It can now go double the distance, which is 150 meters, and the portal also speeds up the further you get along in the Rift energy. Wraith still has a strong tactical and a useless passive. However, her portal can now be used as more of a macro rotational tool, so she'll be played more in higher level play. This was a great buff to her because when you compared her to someone like Valkyrie, she couldn't navigate her team across the map by any stretch. So now it's much more versatile, and I'm kind of eager to see how Wraith fits in here. Next in S tier is Seer. Wait, Seer got nerfed. How can he still be in S tier? Well, let's face it. He still has wall hacks, and they're still really strong. So let's break down how he's different now. The passive takes an extra second or two to activate. So when you go to ADS it, you can't just constantly spam it to let you know if your surroundings are clear or not. Well, I guess you kind of can, because if you look up to your minimap, it still shows a yellow indicator if you're looking at an enemy. But the heartbeat sensor also has more audio to it now, so will allow enemies to detect it if they hear you ADSing with it. When you connect on an enemy with your scan, the tactical no longer shows a full body scan on them. It's now more going to be like his ultimate, where it highlights them in the center of their body. Speaking of his ultimate, it's now on a 3-minute cooldown, which was previously a 2-minute cooldown, and it only lasts for 25 seconds instead of the previous 30 seconds. So even after all that, Seer is still really strong. I think he edges out Bloodhound still, and that's ultimately why I have him in S tier. Okay, third in S tier is Pathfinder. Pathfinder finally got some buffs this season, and with them, I think I can finally put him in S tier for a season. Now, I gotta be honest, even S tier might be a tad bit of a stretch because he's not perfect. But let's talk about why he's so much better. They increased the speed on zip lines by 66%, and they increased the range on how far zip lines can be shot by over 60%. This means Pathfinder can actually be used for making large rotations throughout the map, and you don't have to rely solely on Valkyrie. On top of that, it's going to be really hard for opponents to track a Pathfinder or his teammates while they're taking a zipline. Now I gotta say, I love these changes. His passive now also centers around his class perk as opposed to going and scanning a survey beacon. So you can get his zipline back very fast if you just look at a care package anywhere throughout the map. This can be done a few times in a row if you want and are able to. Now the biggest downside to Pathfinder hasn't changed. It's still his hitbox. With a gun like the Nemesis or the buffs to shotguns, Pathfinder will continue to get deleted in even more situations where he really shouldn't. Like, I don't know what it exactly is, but his hitbox does not make sense to the Legend's actual model. This discrepancy is the sole reason why you won't see more Pathfinders this season. And I've been asking for this fix in every tier list video I make, so I won't give up on it. Next in S tier is Bangalore. Now, Bang started to emerge more into the meta towards the second half of Season 15. Some players just started realizing she was a strong legend. Others realized her smokes and her ultimate are great ways to fend off third parties or to just close the gap to your enemies from a distance. Now, with the changes to the Assault class, I think this buffs all of those legends, but Bangalore particularly. Carrying extra ammo and finding those smart bins to get fully kitted is a great addition to the game. This will make finding digital threats that much easier. Now, besides that, Bangalore's kit wasn't changed really at all, but her smokes help deal with aim assist, as controller players do not get aim assist in Bang smoke, and this was probably one of the main reasons her pick rate began to rise in ranked last season. Now, this one may come as a surprise, but last in S tier is Loba. I think Loba's going to be played a lot in Season 16. Here's why. The support class perk to craft banners is huge, and Loba is the only real legend in this class that has a true mobility ability. This will mean that players in ranked, or pubs I guess, can get out of fights with her Q and get to the nearest crafter to get their teammates back into the game. That is assuming if they were going to lose the fight altogether. This is huge because Loba is going to be one of the only legends that can safely get her teammates back into the game without taking the risks of being there and having to 1v3 or for her to try to rat around and try to sneakily grab the banners. Her ultimate is still extremely viable and it will help her and her teammates throughout all stages of a game. This can be especially helpful early game when your team's trying to quickly get situated for a 50-50 off drop or a nearby third party that you guys are planning to take. Now, one thing's for sure, the meta will continue to shift. So although these are my first impressions, I still feel confident that most of these picks will be true to what you will see in your lobbies throughout the season. If I put your main in a lower tier, don't be offended, just prove me wrong. But before you go, there's one thing you gotta know. Your game sense probably needs work, and I broke down everything you need to know to improve it in this video here. Check it out next. Thanks for watching. Peace.